Hello and welcome to Breaking Through, where we bring to you breakaway success stories from the world of civil services. Today, we have amongst us Vikramaditya Singh, who has secured rank 48 at the Civil Service Examination 2017. Hi Vikramaditya, and congratulations on your success.
Thank you so much.
So, tell us a bit about yourself.
I've done my schooling from Chandigarh. After that, I did my 5-year law degree from Nalsar University of Law, Hyderabad. From there, I came to Delhi and worked with a law firm, as I said. Then I went for my master's to Oxford University in the UK. And from there, I also went for a short course to the Hague Academy of International Law. I got a scholarship, so I went for that. And then I came back and I started, I joined work, and that's when the whole, toying with the idea of civil services started for me. And though now, because I have the benefit of hindsight, my first 2 attempts, I couldn't clear the prelims. And perhaps I didn't work hard enough.
So, from Oxford to civil servant now, were there any particular instances which really motivated you? Were there some things which you had seen? Was it someone in the family? What really inspired you to?
So it was a mix of all of those things. One thing was that, the avenues for public service in law, in litigation are limited. And they don't start with your initial days. Initial days, you're earning your bread and butter. So, though I was working with a law firm which was paying me reasonably well, at some point I realized that, there was a deep-seated realization that I was earning only for myself. And I wanted to do a bit more, maybe perhaps follow a larger purpose. That was the motivation. So public service was the main motivation. But since you asked, there is some inspiration from within the family as well. I have 2 civil servants who are currently serving, who are part of my family. So that also gave me a chance to constantly compare the professional satisfaction that I was getting out of my work with the professional satisfaction they were. So that added up to inspiring me towards this area.
So your optional was law?
Yes.
And did you take any coaching for preparation, or was it more of a self-study when it comes to optional as well as general studies?
So optional, I didn't take any coaching. I was blessed to have some seniors' notes from college and some notes that I had made. And there's, you study through books and make your own notes. For GS, like a lot of candidates, I came to Rajendra Nagar and I joined coaching, and I ended up going for a month and a half, 2 months, maybe 2.5 months, and then I left it because I realized that at the end of the day, what you do need for this exam is guidance in terms of direction or in terms of planning. But the content is something that I found there was no point in taking down because you have to do it from the books anyway. Each person has their own way of thinking, but I just thought that didn't suit my way of preparing. So I left it, and then beyond that it was all self-study. But then you have to prepare through test series and mocks and all of that I did, like most aspirants do.
So now the preliminary examination is just less than a month away, in fact just 3 weeks away. Was there any particular change in your strategy which you brought about after successive failures in the preliminary examination?
So I think the prelims is the toughest stage of the exam, and it's also the most devoid of certainty stage. And I didn't clear the prelims in my first 2 attempts. And actually I was I think there's, in every prelims, every successive year, there's a category of students who just miss it by a little bit or just make it by a bit. There's the clubbing happens around the cutoff. And both those attempts I missed it just by a mark, 1.5 marks, 2 marks, it was like that. So I did bring about some changes. One was, especially this year's paper, which I thought was particularly more challenging than the previous year's paper. A couple of things I did. One was that I did a lot of revisions. One thing that helped me was that I limited the number of test series that I was doing. I did the past year papers really well. That's sort of, by doing the past year papers, one doesn't mean that you're solving a question as you're doing in a paper, but you analyze each and every statement. So that sort of gives you some insight, maybe some hunches into how UPSC frames it, how the answers are, and perhaps if you have to do some guesswork, you can get some help from there. For example, all these hacks, I think they're already out there in the market and everyone's repeated it, but extreme statements, you have to, it's a red flag. When you read the standard books, that's of course something that you have to do over and over again. But there's still a lot of questions which you can't find anywhere. So what I did for those questions was that many online websites, they have daily quizzes. So I maintained a register and I made 7 sections in that register and subject wise, so all the 7 subjects in the exam, the course. And the daily quiz that I would do, stuff I didn't know or stuff, one random fact here and there which can come but you don't really document it in that way. So I would put it down in my register. So that's something that helped. And another thing that helped was, especially in previous year's paper, was that I attempted a lot of questions. I think risk taking is something that now in this prelims exam you have to do. And in fact, I had also perhaps seen your video or someone's video where, someone drilled this thought into my mind that even if you attempt 10 more, you have to get only 3 right to be in positive. So when I attempted, and my strategy was that, I don't think my accuracy is too high. So if I attempt 80, chances are that I wouldn't get more than 62, 63, even my best attempt right. So after 80, I calculated in that paper that I don't think there's any way I'm going to make it. So I went ahead and attempted a good 95, 96 questions, and I was like, dekha jayega.
So you think it is very important to be there in the examination using your common sense to decide that how many you should attempt to?
Definitely. Don't go with any preconceived notions that, this was the cutoff last year, because as much as I tried to stay away from it, the truth was that 116 being the cutoff the previous year was there in my mind. And it did substantially fall because the standard of the paper was higher. And this year's paper also required, I thought it also required a lot of analysis. In each and every question, it's not that if there's a polity question, you can apply only your polity knowledge. So that's somewhere I think revising the books is very important. More than that, one thing I've seen that a lot of aspirants, since, a lot of previous years toppers have said that you must do test series, do 50, 60 papers. It's a great thing, but I don't think that should be done at the cost of your standard revision books, your current affairs, monthly current affairs. It should run parallelly, but definitely not at the cost of that. So what happens is a lot of people start doing 50, 60 papers, and somewhere, that knowledge that analysis gets converted to rote learning.
Talking about the mains examination, which is the most important stage of the civil service examination, you've done really well in some of the papers, especially GS paper 3 and essay. Could you tell us a bit more about GS paper 3?
So, in a way, it's sort of redemption for me because last year I missed the mains the interview cutoff by I think 6 or 7 marks, and GS paper 3 where everyone had scored high, I had 85. And so this time I was even in essay last year I had 135, which I don't think was a good score, but this year I've scored reasonably okay. So GS paper 3 particularly, I did put in some extra effort in the sense that I had heard some previous year's toppers talking about this. So I made, especially for the economics questions, I made a few pages notes on specific facts and figures, which I tried to put in my answers. And I quoted, the main reports also. Of course, there's a lot of scope for discretion there, but whatever, correct stats and reports I had, I quoted them. The third was I structured my answers in a way that I tried doing it the previous year also, but I think it was more defined this year, where, for example, there was one question on the budget: clean, energize and transform the economy. So I would make proper subheadings for clean, schemes within that, sub-subheadings. So I think the structure of my answers was a little better than last year. I had a proper introduction, proper conclusion. More than that, I think barring paper 1, my time management was also better. Where I think especially the GS papers are really a test of not just writing good answers, but writing them in that much time span and writing the max that you can. With essay, last year, I think my topic selection was not okay. I selected Need, Greed, Breed, which was a philosophical topic, which actually I still think I did a good job with it. And the other one was federalism, which perhaps, with my law background, I don't know if I would have been impartial with it. So this time I decided that I'm going to pick, last time my idea of going into the essay was that I'm going to pick topics which are challenging and which not many people would take. And I would try to do justice to them. This time I thought, I completely reversed my strategy and I thought I'm going to take the most basic topics and try and, which most of the people will take, and try and write better than, relatively better than others. So I chose education and the concept of new woman.
Did you write any essays before going into the examination?
Yeah, this time I wrote 4 essays before going, and actually practice does help because when I analyzed them myself, I thought that there was a fair enough difference between the first essay and the fourth one. Because I think for this exam, so I'm from law school where we write projects and essays, we write it in every semester for 5 subjects. So you think that you can write well, but I think this exam requires a little bit of practice and it requires a different mindset where, the standard statements I'll also repeat. You try and touch most perspectives, you try and touch most dimensions. You try and, a standard paragraph would be giving your statement, giving a possible counter statement and giving a possible counter statement. Of course, you can't do this for every para, but at least you have a chain of thought and within that you bring out your arguments in a planned way. So, of course, rough work really helps. I think I would have spent a good 15-20 minutes per essay for rough work. But no matter how much I tried in the 4 practice essays I did, my time management was always a bit off. My first essay would always take 1 hour 50 minutes and the next one would be 10 minutes or 15 minutes of rough work. And
did the same happen in the examination?
It did happen. But luckily, the second topic was the new woman topic, where I think I had my thoughts channelized before going in. So I think it just sort of flowed well. So I didn't need to spend that much time on rough work. For education, I spent a lot of time because I hadn't written on it before and perhaps my thoughts weren't already structured. What does help is that some basic areas you can have a few, pointers, because at the end of the day, they're going to have essays on foreign policy, something related to our polity, health, education, they're broad subheadings. Of course, the question may vary within, but this is something you do for GS also. So having some thoughts in place for every possible area does help, and it doesn't actually take very long to do that.
Now, answer writing is a very key component of this examination. What changes did you make to your style and how did you make them?
I think the most discernible change actually is that I increased the content. And I think that is the most important bit. Answer writing practice does help, but okay, once you have the structure in place, and actually I think you need to follow a very simple structure which everyone recommends, that you give a good introduction, you give a good conclusion, and you give, points in favor, against, you use the content to supplement your points. Beyond this, how different can the structure be? So I think beyond practicing, finishing the paper in 3 hours, what's more important is that alongside you need to increase your content. Though I tried doing that and it was successful in paper 3 and perhaps to some extent paper 4 also. I don't think I've got very average marks in paper 1 and 2. Paper 1 I knew that because I couldn't finish the paper. So 2 15 markers, leaving that is quite criminal. So according to that I've still got okay marks.
So did you also follow the word limit?
Not really, in the sense that I consciously didn't think that, I have to write 200 or 250 words. I tried to fill up the space how much ever I could. At the same time, there were questions where, I would have written 1.5 page and, it would have been half of the word limit. But if I could fit in that much content in that much space, that was...
So how did you manage time? Was it some time allocated for each and every question, or was it more like back of the mind calculation?
Yeah, so I think it was more back of the mind, and it was roughly hour-wise, because I think even calculating question-wise can get quite cumbersome where you're already in a stressful situation. So I would try and do, because the pattern of the paper changed in the GS paper, especially there were 15 markers and 10 markers instead of 12.5 markers. So I attempted the 15 markers first, and I figured from my first paper's experience that the 15 markers are more important and you need to write more content and longer answers in those. Whereas the 10 markers, because there are only 2 sides, you can actually even write an answer in 5 minutes. You don't need the 7-8 minutes that you required for a 12.5, 2.5 sides wala answer. So I would try and finish the 10-15 markers in about 1 hour and 50-55 minutes and keep 1 hour and 5-10 minutes for the last. But that said, the rough calculation was that, okay, first 1 hour is getting over, so have I done at least 5.5 to 6 questions? Because your speed also increases, right? And as pressure increases and the clock is going on, you also start writing faster. So it was more of a rough calculation.
So Vikram, how important is presentation aesthetics of the answer? A lot of students keep emphasizing on that. Do you think that's really important?
I don't think it penalizes or they penalize you if you don't have it, if you do have the content. But I mean, objectively look at it. If there's 2 sheets in front of you, one is really aesthetically well placed, good handwriting, you will give that person, and equally good content, you will give a half a mark extra for that answer. So I think I lost out there because I don't think I have a good handwriting at all. But I definitely think that if you arrange it well, though I did try and arrange it well, in terms of formatting and all of that, whatever little I could try, because there's also time constraint. But I definitely think that having a good handwriting and arranging it well does give that slight edge. I think so.
Now, moving on to the optional subject, and you just elaborated a bit about how you got access to notes of seniors. What was your strategy with law optional?
So, law paper 1 has constitutional law and international law. Constitutional law, everyone from Nalsar knows we were blessed to have a really, really good teacher, Professor Erubi, and his notes are legendary for anyone who's been to Nalsar or Delhi University for that matter. So the first thing I tried to do, and we were fortunate to be taught by him in one semester and not in the other. So I had my notes for one semester. The first thing I tried to do was catch hold of some senior who can give me his notes for the other semester. So that is where it helped. For international law, I made my own notes. And that is something that I think is very important, which if you really ask me in terms of the difference between my first mains and the second mains, this time I had made proper notes for GS and for law. And in fact, for my optional, I even made sub notes of my notes, because scribblings, before the paper, because you can't possibly revise even 2-3 registers the day before the exam. You can revise those 100 pages, 120 pages. So I did that. For paper 2, what I did was that you have paper 2 is not, so paper 1 still has a philosophical side to it, constitutional law, that, slightly deeper questions. Paper 2, I think, is more application based and it's more fact based. So either you know it or you don't. And in that case, you don't need to have very heavy books. There are Delhi University, there's books, which you can get in the market. But what I did do was that you have to, for law, for case laws, I think you have to balance your answer with the locus classicus, the main famous cases, with, if there's any new case that has happened in the last 5 years, it's good that if you know that. So for that, I went to Delhi Law Facts website and they have a reading list for every subject. So I made those case lists as my guidelines as the periphery of what I was going to do. And then I read the books and made my own notes accordingly. So these are small things that I did for law.
You've done extremely well in ethics as well. And this year the numbers in ethics have varied a lot. So first of all, what were the sources which you referred for ethics? And secondly, what was your strategy to especially attempt the case study questions?
So regarding sources, there was no one particular source. Last time I walked into the ethics paper last attempt, without having read anything, just did a few definitions as what people had prescribed, and I did a few definitions, and I was taken by surprise where a lot of thinkers and all were asked, but I still scored reasonably okay last year. I think I got 110. This year I've got 102, but this year I think 102 is a decent score. What I did do was I did thinker as well, and I think for that the source was Vision Notes. For definitions, I didn't have the time to put in that much effort, so online I got some link to some previous year's toppers notes, and I just used that for definitions. And for other notes, I've made my own document, 90 pages document, where I've collated different sources and put in all the stuff that I thought I required. That has definitions, that has thinkers, and it has the public administration part, whatever little that is included. I found a few handouts in the markets in Rajendra Nagar, and I picked up whatever I thought was. So I spent a good 4-5 days on ethics doing this. Regarding making my notes, and then you just have to read it once every week. And regarding case studies, I think that is where my background of law and having worked as a lawyer helped, because I think that possibly gives you more options to think of in every case study. I also thought that whether or not, so there was one particular case study, if you remember, I think the guy is going for his interview. Yes. So that actually didn't require a long answer at all. You could have finished that answer in 1 page. But I still thought that I'm going to give all the 3-4 options I can think of. And there was one thing that I think I heard, which I hadn't practiced in the mocks because I hadn't heard of that strategy before. But I think 3-4 days before the paper, I was just on YouTube, and I heard some previous year topper, and he had said that he used to do a SWOT analysis after every answer. So I hadn't practiced it, but I did it for every case study in the paper, because I thought that was a pretty good strategy, where you make a SWOT chart and just write 1 or 2 words. So it's sort of a concluding thing for the examiner. So that helped. And though my time management was not very good coming to the 10-marker answers, but that is where I just think that keeping it simple and writing more examples. What I really used to do was that actually for these 10 markers, you can write, you can go on and on with the theory. But I think what I did everywhere, even in case studies, was that I would give examples and try to put a point through examples. So I think that might have helped me.
Now, current affairs has become a nemesis for many aspirants in the civil service exam. How did you tackle, what were the newspapers which you would read? How much time did you spend? And did you make any notes? What was your strategy around current affairs?
So, without current affairs, you can't crack this exam. And I'd go to the extent of saying that you do need to make some notes, because they really help for the main stage. Mains, interview, every stage, they really do help. Prelims, I still think that no matter how good notes you make, there always will be better notes in the market. But mains and all are little personalized notes. So I think the notes that are there in the market, everyone's going to write. So a few pointers here and there, if you have extra, that helps. So what I did was I used to read the Hindu and the Indian Express. The Hindu, I would make it as my base paper and read it properly. Indian Express, I would only do the editorials and the explained page. I made notes online on my computer. And what I did do was that I would read the paper and not make straight up notes there, but if there was any editorial that I wanted to pick up a few points from, you don't have to read the editorial word to word from start to bottom. You sort of gauge through the paras and you see if you can pick up any additional points. That's what I would do, and I would underline it and later put it in my notes online. I made documents paper-wise, and so there's a defined syllabus, right, for the mains, and the headings. So like paper 2 has your governance aspect, it has your unpublic aspect, international relations, polity. Within polity also there's, judiciary, this, that. So I would make those headings and whatever thing came. So for notes, when I started, I would do the whole thing from the newspaper. Apart from this, you have to do one current affairs magazine monthly. So I did Vision's monthly current affairs magazine because I think it is of a really high standard. And for the mains, though I did have my notes, I also didn't want to miss out on stuff that was already there in the market, and I was willing to work as hard as I could for this exam. So I had my own notes which I kept on revising, but I also did mains 365, which I actually think really helped this time because it was a good combination of, getting some back-end standard information and connecting it with current affairs. And there were many questions in the GS papers which actually were subheadings from those mains 365. So that helped. So this is how I would tackle it.
All this content of GS, optional, current affairs, static, it becomes a Herculean task to revise the content. What was your revision strategy for mains as well as for prelims?
Mains first. I tried, this time what I did was that I tried writing all the mocks that I had to write, and whatever reading I had to do, I set a deadline which was exactly 1 month before the actual mains was starting. And whatever I had to do for the first time, I did it, and I kept 1 full month only for revision. I would keep updating, I would keep newspapers for, the last thing in the day, because that's not something you have to learn or apply your mind at. You only have to pick up a few pointers and keep adding to your notes, which you can do when you're, a little tired as well. So that's something that I did. I revised much more than I did the previous time, which is what probably enabled me to add more content, because if you have ready points, you write them better in that much less time. So that is something that helped me. Apart from this, the thing is, you always have this fight between GS and optional and what you want to give your time to, and both are competing claims. While optional says that people say that optional makes you get into the list because everyone's around GS, but we've seen people scoring 500 in GS this year, so clearly GS is very important as well. So you somehow have to balance it. I can sit here right now and say this is the right way, this is the right way, but I don't think there is a right way. I just think you struggle through it day in, day out and try and find the right balance and do everything that you can and do your best and go and write it. For the prelims, as I said, again, the content is the same for the prelims and the mains. It's only how you study it that changes. And actually, having written the mains once helps you, because I'll just give a small example. So take geography, for example. There's a chapter on in that physical geography book, NCERT, the blue colored book. There's a chapter on weathering. Yes. Okay, and I remember writing an answer for vision where this was last year, and I remember writing this answer where there was a holistic question which you had to write all 3 forms of weathering, and you could perhaps only write subheadings of like one line of their subheadings from the chapter. So in your head, you need to know the whole chapter, their subheadings, but for the prelims, they're going to ask you within physical weathering, they're going to ask you its subforms ka 1 line they'll pick up. So you're doing the same thing, but you're doing it in a different manner for the prelims vis-a-vis the mains. But once you study for the mains, you have to internalize all of this anyway for the prelims. So I think what this also you realize through your own experience, and it's difficult to, learn from others' advice, though if you can, that's great. But you prepare for the mains and the prelims sort of gets prepared in the process. But those daily quiz I would do very religiously, and I think past year papers in one test series. You can pick up any one test series because it also gives you possible questions on current affairs. So that is what plugs the gaps.
Now coming to the last and the final stage of the examination, that is the personality test. How did you prepare yourself? Did you pursue any hobbies also? And how did you prepare yourself for the personality test?
So I have been pursuing, so I play sport, and I picked up squash, and I started playing tournaments last year through the pre and mains. So that is something that I had been doing through my preparation anyway, and I would play pretty regularly. But so the ideal way of preparing for the interview, I think, is that you should know everything that you know for the mains, plus everything that you've written in the DAF. But that is the ideal way, and there's a gap of 2 months or 2.5 months, people 3-4 months between the mains and the interview, and then everyone gets a bit lax during that time, and it's difficult to know everything that you knew for the mains. But what's important is keep yourself updated with current affairs, because they do tend to ask those questions. What I did was, again, I made notes for it because I wanted to work hard and not just rely on luck for this stage. And I made some possible questions, which are standard questions, like why IAS, why did you leave law, personalized questions that I thought they could ask me. And I wrote pointers. Apart from that, I looked up everything on my DAF, starting from my school to, if it's connected with any institution, my university, my, where I did my masters, prominent personalities from there, prominent personalities from my college, everything, even if there's one word on your DAF, you need to know it, as you would be advising others anyway. So I made notes on that, and then I kept revising it again and again.
Failure is an inevitable part of the journey through the UPSC civil service examination, and you yourself faced failure thrice. What really kept you motivated, and how did you keep yourself motivated for putting in your effort and achieving this success?
It's easy for me to say now, but it's a struggle day in, day out, and I also had very lean phases because I hadn't even reached the interview stage. Twice I didn't make it through the prelims. So the main motivation for me was that I wanted to do this for the right reasons. So that itself is a motivating factor, because if you want to do it for public service, you're reading and you're seeing how people can impact major policy implementation. So, reading about this, seeing these things change around you keeps you motivated. Apart from that, it can't just be that. So I used to run, jogging was one of my hobbies. So that sort of, people have different forms of meditation. People meditate. For me, my running was my meditation, where, I would try and get my head clear. I have a supportive family. They would keep me motivated. But despite all of this, it took a lot of motivating videos on YouTube, sport-related motivating videos, to sort of, keep me. I would wake up in the morning and I would try and see something that would get me through that day. So that's something I've done. There's enough links that have been posted by previous years toppers and all. So I would see those. I would read interviews of previous years toppers, and I would see that people really have overcome so much adversity and so many challenges. So these things, it's a daily struggle, especially for someone who's not made it in the first few attempts, to keep yourself motivated. But that said, there's a couple of things that you realize you get a little philosophical when you're not getting where you want to get at. So you start seeking motivation in everything. So I'll give you a small example. When I used to run, one round was 3 kilometers. So I started with that. And I would, later start doing 2 rounds. So every single time, even if I was doing it for 5 months, when I was about to finish that one round of 3 kilometers, 100 meters before that, my legs would start hurting and I'd be like, acha ho gaya, I'm going, one round is enough, I have to study also. I'd find all excuses to not go for the second round. And the minute I would start the second round and do the first 100 meters, I would easily do the next round. So what I took out of that was that whatever limitations you have are all there in your head. And whenever, I would try and implement it, that if I'm having a good day, if I'm having a bad day, I would not study for 4-5 hours, leave it aside, watch a movie or something, come back. But if I'm having a good day, let me not put a limit to it. If I'm doing well, then let me go on and on as much as I can. So these thoughts you sort of learn through failure. These thoughts come to you. I think the approach to this exam is very important. And as I said earlier also, the fear of failure is not something that should guide you. What should guide you is the positive attitude of the fact that you want to do it and not thinking that you can't. I think what sort of kept me going was that though I wasn't clearing, even the basic stages, but at no point did I let myself think that maybe I'm, not capable of doing this. I told myself that of course I haven't put in that much hard work and I need to put in more hard work, but I wasn't doubting myself, So that is something that a lot of people, I think, they start doubting themselves, and that is something that you should steer clear of.
So self-doubt is detrimental when it comes
Definitely. The minute you think that, it's not going to happen, then you're on the downhill anyway. You've started that. So you don't have to think at any point that you wouldn't be able to do it. That's something I think the negative versus positive attitude is something that really helps.
What are your ideas of being in the civil service? Is there any particular area or cause which you would want to really work on? And who has been the biggest role model for you in this entire journey for civil service?
So, again, the ideal thing for me to say would be that I would like to work on health or education or women's issues or poverty, or environment. But I think what I want to do is in the initial 10 years, our role is policy implementation, because policy formulation is done at the higher stage. So wherever I am posted, I would, like to gauge what are the requirements of that place. And so much can be done just by implementing things in the right way with the right approach. So that's something, I think small steps are more important than just taking one area and working towards it, because at the end of the day, we need all areas to do well, right? And so I think there are many examples, like you have collector of Kozhikode, you have so many, you have Armstrong, Palme, you read about, every civil service aspirant reads about these role models, and they picked up one incident, but that was their flagship incident, but they're also implementing policy really well in all spheres. So that is something that, these small steps are something I'd like to work at. Regarding my role model, I think my role model has been my mother, because she's the only one who's, so she's been in the education sphere. She's taught English literature for 30 years of her life. She's also an author, and she's written a couple of novels on related to the civil service. So her sense of dedication and discipline in work is something that really, motivated me every day, and she kept me motivated. I think she's the only one who didn't lose hope and said, no, you must keep at it, you will make it. So I think it's a no-brainer to say she was my role model.
Any last parting words which you would have for civil service aspirants?
Yes, just do it for the right reasons. Know that you're doing it for the right reasons. All the other things follow. And if you are doing it for the right reasons, the motivation comes from within. That said, of course, the cliche terms like perseverance, dedication, hard work, all of this is something that, you can't do without. There's this constant debate between luck and hard work. And I asked my father once, I asked him, bhagya mein sab likha hai, to kuch bhi karne ki kya zarurat hai? And he told me that he had read somewhere that Chandragupta Maurya asked Chanakya this question, and Chanakya answered that kya pata bhagya mein ye likha hai ki hard work karoge to milega. So I think that pretty much sums it, that hard work is a necessary but perhaps not sufficient condition, but it's something that you can't do without. So you have to work hard. And devil lies in the detail. Those revisions, they're dry. You don't want to do the 5th revision, 6th revision, because you're like, ye sab aata hai, but nahi, it's required. So just hang in there and keep doing it.
Thank you so much, Vikram. It was a pleasure talking to you, and we really hope that you are able to achieve what you set out for. And we hear your name quite far often, much more than just success in civil service exam, and you go on to achieve greater heights. Thank you so much.